I am sure many of you will agree that the last few years have been quite chaotic. A pandemic, the biggest war in Europe since World War II, an energy crisis, and the highest inflation in several decades. Maybe you don't agree with Elon Musk when he said that these are the most interesting of times, but you have to agree that it's certainly not boring. And to top it all off, it seems that the old Eastern Bloc dynamic has been revived. Some even say that the Cold War is returning, only this time the main opponent of the United States is not another union of socialist republics like the USSR, but the People's Republic of China. Well, VisualPolitik viewers, if there is one thing that Washington takes very, very seriously, it is none other than national security. As a result, in the national security strategy that the Biden administration published in 2022, they did not hesitate to point directly to what they consider their two greatest threats, China and Russia.
These competitors mistakenly believe democracy is weaker than autocracy because they fail to understand that a nation's power springs from its people. The United States is strong abroad because we are strong at home. Our economy is dynamic, our people are resilient and creative, our military remains unmatched, and we will keep it that way. Joe Biden on the National Security Strategy 2022.
But let's remember, this is the 21st century. Despite what we are seeing in Ukraine, today's threats no longer come only in the form of conventional wars. Cybersecurity and the use of artificial intelligence are also becoming two major priorities for national security agencies. And it doesn't end there. So far, this century, the use of trade and economic warfare is also becoming more and more important. For this reason, and to complete a series of videos we have made on the security situation in the United States, you will find several links in the description. We at VisualPolitik have asked ourselves a few questions. What really are the major threats facing the United States today? How dangerous is the American rivalry with China and Russia? How are these countries trying to weaken the great North American power, both economically and militarily? Are external threats the only ones Uncle Sam is facing? Well, VisualPolitik viewers, in this video, we're going to answer all these questions. But first, did you have a clue that the cost of certain online products and services can fluctuate based on where you're hanging out on the globe? All right, take note, because this is actually happening right now with travel firms like airlines and hotels. For instance, these businesses typically tweak their prices in line with the user's country. Therefore, if you're mapping out your holiday and you're in an area with higher buying power than your desired spot, be on guard. They're likely to try to cash in on this. A recent study by NordVPN carried out in the UK demonstrated how certain prices can double, particularly when it comes to renting a vehicle. So how do you sidestep these price disparities? NordVPN is your best bet for dodging these price leaps. When you link up to one of their servers, your actual location is masked, and you can opt for a different location. With this trick up your sleeve, you'll be able to price match and sniff out the best bargains for your getaway. Furthermore, NordVPN gives you the chance to soak up unlimited content from diverse parts of the world without any geographical barriers. It's compatible with a multitude of devices and allows you to link up to 6 of them with a single account. On top of that, NordVPN's threat protection feature will have your back, operating in the background, even when you're not hooked up to a VPN server. So quit stalling. Check out NordVPN and get an exclusive deal by going to nordvpn.com/VPEN. And if it doesn't quite hit the mark for you, no worries, you've got a whole 30-day money-back guarantee.
The new forms of war.
It is more than clear to all of us that the US military is by far the most powerful in the world. But imagine for a moment that the United States and China were to suddenly start an all-out war by land, sea, and air. Aerial bombardments, naval battles, missiles, cyber attacks. Do you think that in such a scenario, China would be more successful than Russia was in Ukraine? Well, most probably yes. Unlike Putin's country, China is an industrial and also, to some extent, a technological superpower. It is also a much bigger country with much more resources, and perhaps that is why China is modernizing much faster than Russia. It's already the world's second largest economic power, behind only the United States, so China has more than enough capacity for upgrading its weaponry and military capabilities. Good evidence of this is the presentation of the aircraft carrier CNS Fujian, the third and most advanced aircraft carrier China has produced, and which in certain fields competes directly with the most advanced US carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, for example, in the use of electromagnetic catapults. As you can imagine, the new aircraft carriers China is building will reinforce its maritime dominance in the entire region. Even so, this is only the tip of the iceberg, as this country is also investing heavily in the production of hypersonic missiles, 6 times faster than the American F-35 fighters. Meanwhile, it is China's investment in cyberspace that is attracting the most attention. In fact, according to Verizon, 95% of all cyber espionage suffered by the United States comes precisely from China. That is why it's not unusual to come across news stories like this from time to time.
Chinese hackers spying on U.S. critical infrastructure, Western intelligence says. Chinese hackers targeting U.S. Guam aim to disrupt communications, Microsoft says. Guam has become increasingly important strategic hub for U.S. Chinese hacking group targeting U.S. agencies and companies has surged its activity, analysis finds.
In reality, the biggest threat the United States is facing right now from other nations is cyber attacks. But take note, it's not only from China. Russia, for example, is not far behind either. In fact, in February 2022, the United States expelled 12 officers from the Russian mission to the UN for having been conducting espionage and cyber espionage operations. However, US concerns also extends to a suggestion Putin has put on the table during his invasion of Ukraine, the use of nuclear weapons. We all know by now that Russia is the world's largest nuclear power, and that China is very close to overtaking India, Pakistan, and North Korea. Nevertheless, the US has its eyes on another player. Check out this news item.
Iran nuclear IAEA inspectors find uranium particles enriched to 83.7%.
Exactly. I don't think this will come as a surprise to anyone, but VisualPolitik viewers, Uncle Sam is worried about Iran. The land of the Ayatollahs is managing to enrich uranium to levels that are very close to what is needed for developing nuclear weapons. And that is something that could create immense chaos in the Middle East. Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey. Practically the whole world would go crazy in this region if the Ayatollahs finally got their hands on the bomb. The risk would be too high. The Iranian regime would be untouchable, even, for instance, with regards to the Strait of Hormuz, through which much of the oil consumed by countries such as South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan passes. And who is Iran's ally? 3, 2, 1, exactly. Xi Jinping's China. You start to connect the dots. So we have China, Russia, Iran, conventional warfare, hybrid warfare, and cyber attacks. These are all relatively new risks that have been created or rebooted in the last 2 decades. So the question is, in the face of all of this, what is the United States doing? Well, of course, they are not just going to stand idly by. And that is what explains news headlines like this.
Biden prepares largest Pentagon budget in history as spending cuts loom.
Make no doubt about it. Uncle Sam is going to step on the gas. The US is going to continue to spend massive amounts of money to try to remain far superior to all of its opponents on all fronts. With all the cyber attacks it suffers, the Biden administration has made cybersecurity a central pillar. As a result, the US military has already deployed several teams tasked with cybersecurity, as well as teams to conduct its own cyber attacks. Likewise, with technological development, especially from China, the Pentagon is stepping up its game and pouring billions and billions of dollars into robotics, artificial intelligence, laser technology, and the development of hypersonic attack and defense systems. For example, in recent years, Lockheed Martin has installed the Helios system on all US Navy destroyers. In other words, the United States already has laser weapons in its fleet capable of shooting down aircraft and sinking ships. So, in a nutshell, we are witnessing the beginnings of a new military race. Of course, what we have seen is the most conventional part of the threats, but we are in the 21st century, and if there is one thing that we have learned, it is that these are not the only threats that exist at the international level. We can find many more possibilities, and one of the most popular lately is precisely this one.
The dollar empire in trouble?
We all remember Joe Biden saying that he would make Russia an international pariah after it invaded Ukraine, and he meant it. The sanctions he imposed, along with the European Union, have made many countries around the world no longer so confident about engaging with Russia for fears of sanctions. But not surprisingly, Russia has already found a partner who has its back to some extent. China. Gone are the old Cold War disputes. Today, China and Russia have a strong relationship that extends from the military field to energy, finance, and trade. Nevertheless, with the exception of energy, the relationship is rather imbalanced. For example, while Chinese products account for 18% of all that Russia imports, Russian products account for barely 2% of what China imports from the rest of the world. But this is certainly not the only asymmetry between the two, mind you. Indeed, VisualPolitik viewers, since the imposing of sanctions that prevent Russia from trading easily in dollars or euros, Russia has made the yuan its main currency for international transactions. Not only that, it has also become Russia's main reserve currency. But this is hardly surprising. After all, both countries are part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and have been pushing for trade in local currencies rather than dollars. And not only that, in 2015, Russia and China also signed a financial alliance that reinforced this very idea. In fact, while some large Chinese banks have stopped dealing with Russia for fear of violating international sanctions, small and medium-sized banks are not following their lead. As a result, Russia has been able to somewhat circumvent some of the major sanctions. For example, by using alternative payment infrastructures to overcome the SWIFT blockade of many of its banks. All in all, it is not unusual for Putin to say things like this.
We are in favor of using the Chinese yuan for payments between Russia and the countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Putin, after his last meeting with Xi Jinping this year, 2023.
Now, becoming dependent on the yuan. That also has a lot of problems. We told you about that in a recent video that is linked in the description. Swapping Washington's control for Beijing's doesn't seem like the best idea in the world either. And that is why Russia has considered another possibility: to create a new currency among the BRICS. For those of you who don't remember, the term BRICS refers to the acronym for 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Between them, they account for almost half of the world's population and 20% of global GDP. With such numbers, it hardly seems unreasonable to think that they could create a currency capable of competing with the dollar. It is not only that the participating countries would use it, but that they could also make many other countries adapt it for international trade. And so, little by little, a huge network of operations in the BRICS currency could be created. For example, if Thailand had to start using this currency to trade with China from Brazil, they could continue to buy Thai products without having to use a different currency, because Thailand could also benefit from being paid in this currency. And the question is, what is the point of all this? Well, basically, to end the dominance of the dollar, reduce the amount of international capital ending up in the United States, and incidentally, prevent Washington from being able to take advantage of its position to apply sanctions left and right. Of course, it's not easy either. The dollar is very strong. And let's be honest, who would trust a currency run by countries like Russia or China? Besides, could they really agree on who is in charge or how to manage it? It doesn't look like a straightforward mission. Whatever the case, there can be no doubt that the dollar would maintain the bulk of its influence in the global economy. We've already told you about this in detail here on VisualPolitik. Again, take a look at that description. For now, in this video, what we wanted to do was focus on another threat where US adversaries are already increasing. This is another of the great risks against national security that Uncle Sam faces. Risks for which the country seems well covered for now, but are there only external risks? What if the American entrails themselves had some parasite willing to cause them a lot of harm? Any idea what we're talking about? Well, listen up.
A large local fracture?
As we all know, the United States is a country with many strengths, but also with many problems. We see them everywhere. The lack of security in many cities, a huge prison population, the opioid epidemic, a high homeless population, and many other issues. We're talking about problems that are causing a major social fracture. But above anything else, there is one problem that all analysts point out as the most dangerous of all: the enormous political and social polarization. Yes, VisualPolitik viewers, politics in the United States is increasingly no longer focused solely on purely managerial issues such as taxes, gun ownership, or healthcare. Now, identities have also taken over the political space. The division of society by race, ethnicity, gender, and ideology has become very strong. In other words, tribalism has spread through US politics, and polarization continues to deepen. Do you think I'm exaggerating? Well, look at what the Americans themselves think. You see, more than 60% of Americans say political division and violence will increase in the coming years. And let's be honest, it's very likely that this is going to be the case. Since 2016, US society has practically split in two: the four foray into politics of one of the most controversial figures has put a dent in social stability. Credit unquestionably goes to Donald Trump. Can't deny it, right? The situation has reached such a point that Americans tend to be very pessimistic. So much so as to say this.
More than 40% of Americans think civil war likely within a decade.
Logically, it does not seem very reasonable to think of a civil war, but all this could end up paralyzing or even collapsing many of the country's institutions. It's very simple. Polarization makes political alliances more difficult to achieve and negotiations more likely to end in a stalemate. And you know what? This is precisely why the re-election message that Joe Biden released at the end of April this year focuses not on the external threats, but on the great internal threat. The polarization of society. But let's be honest, it's not a particularly conciliatory message. In fact, it singles out the Republicans and does not hesitate to accuse them indirectly of the curtailment of rights and freedoms in the country. In short, the United States faces new challenges. But oddly enough, the most dangerous of all may be those at home. Now, at this point, it is your turn. Do you really believe that the United States will have another civil war? Will the BRICS eventually create their own currency? Do you think that this currency could really displace the dollar? Will China succeed in overtaking the United States militarily? You can leave me your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel, hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like the video, please like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best. See you very soon.